Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Couch, and I will be supporting this new grant program as an analyst, and I will be the first line of communication with the grantees. We also have staff here from CAL FIRE's Climate and Energy Programs and Grants Management Unit to present this workshop and answer your questions, including Shannon Johnson, Kristen Murr, Erica Uhor, Mike Centenos, Nadine Scarborough, and Ruby West. Let's go. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so here's a quick outline of today's workshop. We anticipate an approximately 45-minute presentation, followed by 45 minutes for questions, and we will end no later than 11:30 a.m. Shannon will provide background on the Climate and Energy Program and associated grant programs. Kristen will give us more details about the Climate Bond Regional Grants and CAL FIRE's new program. Mike will touch on Climate Bond's priorities regarding climate benefits and benefits to vulnerable population, disadvantaged communities, and severely disadvantaged communities. Erica will talk about environmental compliance. Nadine will touch on grant administration. Ruby will walk us through how to apply through the UNA Solutions portal. Kristen will conclude by relating lessons learned from 3 regional pilots. And finally, we will all be available to answer any questions. And now I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Shannon.
It was calibrated.
Go ahead,
Please
Shannon.
mute
Thank you.
yourself.
However, it was.
Please mute yourself.
Great, thank you. Hello, I'm Shannon Johnson. I'm the staff chief for Forest Health Wood Products and Bioenergy. CAL FIRE's Climate and Energy Program is working at local, state, and national levels to protect and manage California's forests, aiming to mitigate the impacts of climate change that are already being felt. Program staff help to manage the forest health, tribal wildfire resilience, business workforce development, and now our regional wildfire and landscape resilient grant programs. And with the assistance of our climate change program, analyze and report on our efforts to meet California's climate and biodiversity goals. CAL FIRE also works closely with the Wildfire and Forest Resilient Task Force. All these efforts help the department to meet part of its mission of protecting the resources of California. Climate and Energy has 3 main grant programs. Previous slide. Climate and Energy has 3 main grant programs. Forest Health funds landscape scale projects that reduce the risk of disturbance events from catastrophic wildfire, drought, and pest mortality. Treatments focus on forest fuel reduction, prescribed fire, pest management, reforestation restoration, tribal land management, and biomass utilization. This year's solicitation has closed and full proposals have been invited back for award announcements at the end of the year. Tribal Wildfire Resilience Grants support California Native American tribes in managing ancestral lands, implementing and promoting traditional ecological knowledge in wildfire resilience, and establishing wildfire safety for tribal communities. Public comment opens next week, and the solicitation will be opening in July for that grant program. Business and workforce development, which is the focus, plays a vital role in enhancing forest sector businesses and workforce development in California, particularly in support of healthy California forests. This solicitation actually closes today, and awards will be in September of 2026. The Office of the State Fire Marshal also manages wildfire prevention, which supports locally led efforts that reduce wildfire risk, strengthen preparedness, and help protect lives, property, and critical infrastructure. Applications are currently being accepted for this grant program through July 8th of this year. Projects for the new regional grants program may include a component of each of these 3 grant programs within climate and energy, and as well as CAL FIRE's wildfire prevention program. This slide of CAL FIRE's grants include the programs I have already mentioned, in addition to the Forest Legacy, which funds conservation easements and fee title purchases, the Wildfire Resilience Block Grant Program, which covers activities related to forest improvement, reforestation, technical assistance, and planning. This also includes the Wildfire Resilient Stewardship Program, which awards grants on smaller scales to regions. And that will be opening in July of this year. The California Forest Improvement Program is a cost share program which covers activities related to forest improvement, reforestation, and planning for private landowners. The Urban and Community Forestry Program covers activities related to urban tree planting, planning, workforce development, and education. And the rural or volunteer fire capacity program is designed to provide firefighting support, and that is open until May 31st of this year. And then the Forest Health Research Program covers activities related to research. For additional details and program-specific application processes, please utilize the QR code that's at the bottom of this slide to get to CAL FIRE's grant website. So next slide. The various grant programs focus on different activities and can apply to different geographic locations. Forest health grants focused on forest treatments, which enhance ecological processes at a landscape scale. Wildfire prevention grants focus on reducing hazardous fuels reduction and increasing public safety. Urban grants focus on advancing urban management and tree care. And then in this infographic at the bottom where it says, at the top where it says business and workforce development, you can see that the gears overlap with these other programs, indicating that if this can occur in urban, rural, or wildland areas. As I mentioned, the new regional grants program may cover a range of these activities, and it has the flexibility to address a diversity in landscapes. Well, now I'm going to hand it over to Kristen for more on the regional grants. Thank you.
Can somebody let people in from the lobby while I'm presenting?
Yeah, I can do that, Kristen.
Thank you. Okay. My name is Kristen Merrill. I am a supervising environmental scientist with the Climate and Energy Program at CAL FIRE, and I am the program manager for this new regional wildfire and landscape resilience program. Please use the QR code here to follow along. I also linked the grant guidelines in the chat, but everything that I'm going to mention here is in the grant guidelines. I hope you'll use this as your first line of defense for questions about the program, and let's learn a little bit more about the program. So the program is a product of the general obligation bond called the Safe Drinking Water, Wildfire Prevention, Drought Preparedness, and Clean Air Bond Act of 2024. From here on out in this presentation called the Climate Bond. The Climate Bond, this language is specific to the bond, and the funding was outlined in the bond to implement regional projects, including but not limited to landscape scale projects developed by forest collaboratives, projects developed by regional entities, and projects that implement strategies developed by state conservancies. Notice that it says including but not limited to. Those forest collaboratives and regional entities are defined here and also in the grant guidelines. So it's Forest Collaboratives is a functioning collaborative group. Basically what you want to know here is that it's these groups are representing diverse interests and are transparent and inclusive, and most importantly have sufficient expertise, capacity, and scientific support to effectively plan and implement and monitor. Can you please, everybody mute yourself? Thank you. So that they can implement a large-scale program such as this. Let's talk about how much money is available in the bond, and this is what you see in the FY 25-26 was in the 25-26 budget bill. And then what you're seeing here is FY 26-27 and out years were proposed and are subject to change. They were in the Jan 10 budget. I don't believe they've changed in the May revise, but I have not confirmed that yet. So for 25-26, CAL FIRE was allocated $30 million. The Sierra Nevada Conservancy also has a regional projects program. They were allocated $45 million. Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy was allocated $15 million. And then if you notice, Regional Fire and Forest Capacity, who expects to have their grant guidelines out for public review and comment soon. This year is 10 million, but in the coming years, they've got quite a good amount of money in the bond. So we don't know exactly how this money in the out years in 26, 27 and beyond will be allocated in the upcoming budgets, but the money is in the bond. It just depends on how they're going to roll this out. Please mute yourself. Can somebody on the CAL FIRE team monitor the folks coming in and their microphones? So again, this year we have up to $30 million. Our grant range we're considering is from 5 million to 20 million. And just really note that that the project work must be completed by February 15th. So that we can hit the encumbrance deadline or the allocated deadline.
Get your roll call plan. Take care of the time.
Please mute yourself. So who's eligible for these grants? We covered it already as far as limited, not, or including but not limited to, but specifically who's eligible are public agencies. So any city, county, special district, joint powers authority, state agencies or federal agencies are also eligible. Nonprofits, those that are 501c3. And then eligible tribes are federally recognized Native American tribes or non-federally recognized California Native tribes that are listed in the California Tribal Consultation List. Projects can be and are encouraged to be a collaborative effort of multiple entities or organizations, and we'll address that later. All right, in the grant guidelines, we're going to skip priorities for now. We'll go back to that, and we're going to go to page 4 for eligible activities. And also note that I've put the page number on the bottom left-hand corner of where you can find these in your grant guidelines. So let me turn to my grant guidelines. So we have a lot of activities that are eligible under these grants. As Shannon mentioned, like these grants encompass a number of activities that can be found in a variety of CAL FIRE's grant programs. Beyond forest health and forest landscape resilience, we're also allowing for non-forest landscape resilience. So we're pretty much familiar with forest health activities, but the non-forest landscape resilience activities may include ignition reduction or other fire prevention activities such as replacement or modification of ignition-prone non-native or flashy fuels with less flammable native vegetation, the hardening of infrastructure, including roadways and public access points, and strategic fuel modification that does not result in the establishment of more non-native ignition-prone or flammable fuels. And that's a really important point, is that we don't want to take out fuel and then allow that fuel to get reestablished by more flashy non-native fuels. We're also allowing for community hazardous fuels reduction or modification. These activities you'll generally find in a wildfire prevention grant. So you can do vegetation clearance in critical locations. You can create or maintain fuel breaks in strategic locations. We will allow for the modification of vegetation adjacent to roads, as I just mentioned. And the reduction of fuel loading around critical infrastructure. Prescribed and cultural fire are eligible, focusing on reintroducing fire to or maintaining fire in fire-adapted ecosystems. Pest management activities, including the removal of diseased, infested, or vulnerable trees, and the reduction of conditions that facilitate pest spread. Reforestation and revegetation. We want to reestablish or establish diverse native vegetation types that promote stable carbon sequestration and storage, include habitat functions, and enhance landscape health and resilience. Biomass utilization is generally encouraged under a forest health grant, also encouraged here or eligible here. Maintenance. So eligible activities also include the maintenance of desired conditions of and/or improvements to previously established and completed wildfire and landscape resilience projects. We are also allowing for planning. Up to 10% or $1 million, or whichever is less, of the total grant funds requested may be budgeted for environmental and ecological surveys and compliance to further regional project planning and or organizational capacity building. And then finally, workforce education and training. And keep in mind that these activities, if included in a proposal, should be appropriately scaled to the overall project and clearly aligned with the primary objectives of the project. So just submitting a workforce education and training project because you missed the deadline for our workforce development program, workforce and business development program, does not meet the priorities of this program and would not be appropriately scaled. So it has to be in combination too. All right. So now let's go back to page 3 and 4 and talk about the funding priorities. And oftentimes we'll get questions, I'm already getting them, like, is my project eligible? Am I eligible? And yes, I mean, especially when you consider, like, look at if your project matches these funding priorities, because this is how the full proposal against these funding priorities will be how the both the concept proposals and especially the full proposals will be scored. So our funding priorities, we're trying to foster both regional capacity building and partnerships to carry out landscape resilience and community resilience projects and efforts. So we're looking at multi-benefit projects, and those multi-benefit projects should have been identified as a regional priority using a transparent prioritization process that integrates data, practitioner expertise, and community input. So we're really focused on a science-based methodology and something that's been transparent and has that partnership input. And then we want to, we are highlighting those projects that are identified in a regional prioritization project or regional plan. The regional plan should include a defined partnership with clearly identified roles and responsibilities. So thinking about governance structure identified, also a clearly delineated landscape or geographic boundary, and an implementable strategy with defined actions and timelines. So in the grant guidelines, we've included a link to the RFFC program guidelines. Not that you must be an RFFC grantee to get one of these grants, but that the RFFC program guidelines include a really good identification of what a regional priority plan should include. All right. Really, really important is that the applicants should have demonstrated sufficient administrative, technical, and operational capacity to successfully manage and deliver large multi-level projects. This grant program is oriented to organizations that have significant operational capacity. And we'll talk about the reason for that, for the why afterwards in the lessons that we've learned, and that it takes a good amount of organizational capacity to be able to manage these projects. But remember that there are other grant programs out there, notably the RFFC regional grants, that are more tailored to organizations that are less that have the less capacity or still building their planning processes or still building their RPPs, regional priority plans. Another funding priority is projects that leverage CAL FIRE funds with other state, federal, local, and or private philanthropic dollars. This is a priority of the climate bond program. We're also looking for alignment of funding across climate bond programs. I mentioned that not only are we focused on implementation, but advancing regional capacity to develop, prioritize, and implement wildfire and landscape resilience projects. And I think we really support this statement in the grant guidelines under D. Special consideration will be given to projects that provide technical assistance and or capacity building support to enable high priority projects to secure funding that would not otherwise be able to access through CAL FIRE's grant programs or comparable funding opportunities. So our forest health program requires significant amount of capacity. So some of the projects that might be funded under this as sub-projects might be those that couldn't quite level up to what is required under a forest health project. We're looking at projects that include broad involvement from regional landowners, including tribes. And then these next 3 bullets are straight out of the climate bond, is that we're giving priority to projects that enlist the services of the California Conservation Corps or Community Conservation Corps or tribal corps, and projects that provide meaningful and direct benefits to disadvantaged communities, severely disadvantaged communities, or vulnerable populations. These 2 bullets are covered in Appendix G and Appendix F. And those projects that advance the state's strategic goals and priorities, we've included a list of those plans and strategies, including the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan. Because we have limited time to implement these projects, projects that have environmental compliance completed or have environmental compliance completed for a majority of the sub-projects are a priority for us for funding, and all sub-projects are required to have environmental compliance completed within 1 year of sub-award. And finally, as we noted, both Sierra Nevada Conservancy and Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy were allocated funding in this year's budget for regional projects. So those projects that are within the jurisdictions of SNC and SMC are not our funding priorities for this year, fiscal year. All right, as recommended by the climate bond, this program will have it's following a 2-step process with the concept proposal first, and then a full proposal will be invited from eligible concepts that are reviewed and scored, and the most competitive concept proposals will be invited back. The deadline for concept proposals is June 30th at 3 p.m. These are our concept proposal scoring criteria. And there's no real secret to how we're going to score because it's identified here and in our grant guidelines. If invited back to submit a full proposal, this is how we will score those full proposals, and these tie directly back to our funding priorities. All right. Within 6 months of the CAL FIRE grant awards, the regional grantee, so if you've received a grant through this program, you would now be called a regional grantee, and the regional grantee must submit a portfolio of prioritized regional sub-projects. They may come in with those sub-projects in the proposal, but definitely need to be identified within 6 months. CAL FIRE is not going to scrutinize in detail each one of those sub-awards, but we're looking at that portfolio in a high-level review just to ensure that the proposed projects meet the eligibility requirements of this program. And then within 4 months of our review of those subawards, the grantee will be required to submit for each subaward a project form that has treatment areas, work plan, and environmental compliance status, a map of the project area, climate benefits information. Am I going beyond what I should be talking about? Yes, I'm sorry.
You're doing great.
No, this is Mike's. I'm turning this over now to an expert. Mike is going to walk you through this list, and I'm going to turn off my microphone.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, so we're talking now about the subawards that each regional grantee identifies. And so I'm just going to briefly cover the data and reporting requirements. And the context for this is that the state's making a $10 billion investment through the climate bond. And so we have this obligation to really be transparent to the voters in the legislature about what's being accomplished with the funding. And then in particular, because of the funding source and kind of the priorities established in the climate bond, CAL FIRE is going to need to report on how the bond funds are providing climate benefits and benefits to our most at-risk communities. So that's kind of the context. To help us do this, our regional grantees are going to need to provide certain information about each of these subawards that Kristen started to outline. So a lot of these are just kind of project details, what's going to be done, where is it going to be done, having a good map and detailed outline of the treatments, spatial data, we'll need so we can understand, where the project is and where those treatments fit within the project. Information on the project's climate benefits. So this is going to include providing some information so that we can model the climate mitigation benefits of the project. And we'll have staff that will support you when you get to that phase of the project. And then an assessment of meaningful and direct benefits for disadvantaged communities, severely disadvantaged communities, and vulnerable populations. And those are all terms that are specifically defined in the bond. And we'll be able to guide you through how to do that assessment when the time comes, as well as any environmental compliance documents that have already been completed to make sure that the subawards have all complied with the California Environmental Quality Act and other environmental regulations. And Erica will get into that more in just a moment. Can we go to the next slide? So that was all up front as you establish those subawards and get ready to have you or your partner start implementing those projects. Once the subawards are underway, there will be some reporting requirements throughout the life of the grant as well. So that's going to include regular progress reports to share accomplishments, acres treated, trees planted, those types of metrics. And those progress reports will need to be provided for the overall regional grant as well as the individual subawards. We will need updates to the spatial data to reflect completed treatments as the projects move along. And those will go into CAL FIRE's CalMapper database and the interagency treatment dashboard. And that spatial data for completed projects is really important. One, for tracking progress towards state goals, but two, also for folks on the ground like fire suppression personnel, so they know where those treatments are and where they've been completed as they plan for fire suppression and things like that. And then finally, a final report just to detail what was accomplished through the grant. So that's a very general overview, more detail in the grant guidelines, and certainly more detail to come as if you're selected for a regional award and are moving into implementation, we'll be able to provide you with some more guidance as needed. So now I'm going to turn it over to Erica to talk a little bit about environmental compliance requirements.
Thank you, Mike. I'm looking at the people in this webinar, and it's nice to see some familiar names. And if we haven't met, I'm Erica Yor, an environmental compliance specialist with CAL FIRE's Climate and Energy Program. I work across several grant programs, including this new regional wildfire and Landscape Resilience Program. Before I get going, I want to note one thing up front. Throughout my short presentation, I may use the term CEQA and environmental compliance somewhat interchangeably. For purposes of this grant program, CEQA is ultimately the primary mechanism used to complete environmental compliance. And as many of you know, the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, is often described as a look before you leap law. It requires public agencies to consider and disclose potential environmental impacts before making discretionary decisions. For this program, because grant funding involves state or public funds, CEQA applies to project activities that may affect the environment, including ground disturbing treatments, regardless of land ownership, jurisdiction, or organizational affiliation. Next slide, please. So as Kristen mentioned, there's a lot of important things and information in the procedural grant guidelines, and there's an appendix in the procedural grant guidelines specific to environmental compliance. But I want to spend some time today on what I'd consider a key difference between this regional grant program and many of CAL FIRE's other climate and energy grant programs, such as forest health or tribal wildfire resilience, when it comes specifically to environmental compliance and CEQA rules. So for other climate and energy grant program staff, including myself and my counterpart, Caroline Peterson, who I believe is on this call, we provide environmental compliance review and clearance for grant-funded treatments that may affect the environment. That's because CAL FIRE has a direct discretionary role in approving and funding those individual projects. As a result, CAL FIRE may assume CEQA lead agency responsibilities when necessary, and we, CAL FIRE, always serve in a responsible agency role. So this regional grant program works a little bit differently. In this program, CAL FIRE is funding a regional grantee, and the regional grantee then makes its own discretionary decisions regarding which sub-project to select, approve, and fund. Because of that structure, CAL FIRE does not provide the same level of project-by-project review and clearance. Instead, we expect the regional grantee or a public agency partner to essentially serve as a proxy for CAL FIRE in carrying out those CEQA responsibilities. So practically speaking, CAL FIRE expects one of the two scenarios. Either the regional grantee is a public agency and assumes CEQA lead and or responsible agency roles for its subawardees, or the regional grantee is not a public agency, but partners with a public agency that can assume those roles. Next slide, please. You may be wondering, well, what does this actually mean in practice? So if a subawardee does not already have environmental compliance completed and a lead agency role is needed, responsibilities could include performing environmental analysis, preparing environmental documents, and filing notices with the state clearinghouse and, when needed, the county clerk. And as a responsible agency's responsibilities always include reviewing and relying on environmental analysis prepared by the lead agency to inform discretionary decisions, exercising independent judgment regarding environmental impacts, and when necessary, filing a notice of determination for projects involving documents like an EIR, neg deck, MND, etc. And once the regional grantee or their public partner agency has reviewed and verified environmental compliance documentation, they provide written environmental clearance to the subawardee and submit all of these records to CAL FIRE Climate Energy compliance staff. And I outlined this in this slide, but one important reminder is that proof of environmental compliance must be submitted prior to project activities, so prior to implementation for activities that may affect the environment, or within 1 year of the subaward approval. All right, and I've got one more slide. So next slide, please. So we've received a lot of helpful feedback from our regional pilot grant programs. Kristen's going to go more into depth on that, but I want to share a few things that may be helpful as applicants. You think about this through an environmental compliance lens. And the first is that the regional grantee really serves as the backbone for the overall grant agreement. So thinking about this as a backbone, you want to be thinking ahead about partnerships and how you can set yourself up for success. If you're not a public agency, this includes identifying a public agency partner that can help fulfill CEQA lead and responsible agency roles and support environmental compliance review for sub-awardees. And when you're thinking about your sub-projects, it may also be helpful to kind of maintain a balance between projects that are shovel ready, so they have CEQA and environmental compliance complete, and projects that may require more planning. That flexibility can help ensure that the 1-year environmental compliance timeline remains manageable. The second thing I want to talk about is capacity. Kristen already kind of hit on this a little bit, but environmental compliance is just one of several requirements that may require organizational capacity, coordination, and even possible scenarios where you're developing some new internal processes. But not every wheel needs to be reinvented, which leads to my final point, communication. CAL FIRE and climate, energy, environmental compliance staff, Caroline and I, review documents nearly every day. And we're always happy to share informal guidance, whether that's discussing processes that have worked well, what we typically look for in review, how we communicate these clearances, or just simply like helping you think through questions early. So there's a lot to talk about when it comes to environmental compliance, and I feel like I've only scratched the surface today, so I will remind and highly encourage folks to review the environmental compliance appendix and the procedural grant guidelines, and to reach out if you have any questions. I'm going to go ahead and put Caroline and I, we have a shared inbox that we respond to. So this is the cegrants.ceqa@fire.ca.gov. And this is a email that you can email us with questions, and we are more than happy to try to answer them or get answers to your questions and just work through this section of application and or if awarded project with you. So thank you so much for your time, and I will hand it over to Nadine to discuss grant administration.
See if my screen's on. Hi. Oh, I didn't change my background. That's all right. So my name's Nadine Scarborough. I'm one of the state grants managers, and I'm just going to go over some points on project administration to keep in mind if your project is awarded funding. And the grant administration processes begin on page 16 of the grant guidelines. So it's important to note that project-related work cannot begin prior to having a fully executed grant agreement. Invoices are generally submitted on a reimbursement basis. So no work prior to or after the grant period will be reimbursable. And all aspects of the grant management will take place in UNA, which is CAL FIRE's grant management software, which we're going to be going over on a later slides. I did want to mention, so there's some state audit language that's going to be, it's being updated. So there will be an update to the grant guidelines that are posted. Eligible entities, if you're awarded, you can apply request an advance payment. Those are for like up to 25% of your total award minus equipment. And then the grant guidelines have a table that fairly clearly explains the eligible versus ineligible costs. We highly encourage you to review that table. It's important that your proposed budget reflects the guidance provided in that cost table to ensure that you're requesting things that are eligible. And prevailing wage, pursuant to AB 338, so beginning July 1st, 2026, certain fuel reduction work, including but not limited to residential chipping, rural road fuel breaks, and fire breaks funded by the state will be subject to prevailing wage, record keeping, and registration requirements, regardless of whether the project is considered a public work. If you have more questions on that, we encourage you to go to the Department of Industrial Relations. They've published an important notice and frequently asked questions about the prevailing wage requirements. And then regarding indirect cost rates, so Appendix I explains how the climate bond is allowing grantees to designate and justify an indirect cost rate. There are several different options with Prop 4, so we really encourage you to look at that section. Oh, the next slide. So there's three options. There's the federal de minimis rate, the federal NICRA rate, and then a rate proposed by the applicant. It's important to note that CAL FIRE does not allow contractors to add markup fees to subcontractor costs or purchases. So any costs with managing subcontractors or making purchases should be billed as staff time or included in the indirect costs. And CAL FIRE is asking that you identify the processes that you anticipate using in your concept proposal for the indirect rate that you choose. Next slide, please. What happens if you need to make a change to your approved project? Does that mean you'll need an amendment? If you do need to make changes, please keep your CAL FIRE program manager abreast of the potential for changes and alert them as soon as possible. If you do need to make changes to like your scope of work, the budget, or project performance period of an executed agreement, because they can determine if you'll need an informal or a formal amendment. Examples of things that may require a formal amendment requiring like full signatures of the agreement may include things such as change in the project end date as allowed by legislation or liquidation deadline for the funding source, changes to the budget that are equal to or greater than 10% of the total award amount, or change in subaward amount or organization. And if you are awarded funding, more detailed information can be provided at that point. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm now going to turn it over to Ruby, who's going to go over the application process for you via a Unigrants.
My name is Ruby West. I'm a special projects analyst with the CAL FIRE Grants Management Unit. I'm going to walk through the application process using Unigrants. So applications are submitted through the Unigrants subrecipient portal. Unigrants is a web-based grants management system which CAL FIRE has adopted to streamline the full grant lifecycle on a centralized platform. This is the grants portal, so you will find references to that old name, particularly within how-to documents. The entire grant process takes place within the Unigrants portal, from posting and then accepting it to invoice submission and project reporting. Next slide, please. So you can find the grants portal user guide on our website near the bottom of the CAL FIRE grants page under eCivis grants portal information. Again, eCivis and UNA are the same grant portal, just with a recent name change, and eCivis is still referenced in many user guides. The application process is still the same. Next slide, please. So the first thing you'll need to do to get started on your application the link to the solicitation is available in the grant guidelines, on the regional grant website, on the main grant webpage, and through this QR code on the screen.
Ruby, you're cutting out a little bit. It might be helpful to drop your video for stabilization.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so when you access the solicitation, is that better?
I think so.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. When you access the solicitation link, there will be several tabs containing different information on the solicitation. Most of the information available in these tabs can all be found in the grant guidelines document. And so to start your application, you will click on the apply button. Next slide, please. Step 2 involves creating your grant portal account. Assuming this is your first time applying for a project through the portal, you'll need to create an account. You'll fill out the required information and follow all of the prompts that come up. This step will require email verification, so be sure to check your email junk folder if you do not see that email in your inbox. If you already have an existing grants portal account, you will just need to log in with your login credentials. Next slide, please. Step 3 involves, once you've created your UNA portal account, you'll be taken back to the login screen. Enter your login credentials there, and then it will take you to this page here on the screen, and you will click on the Create Application button. Next slide, please. Step 4 involves signing in with your login credentials a second time before you can access the application input forms. A complete application consists of 2 primary sections. First will be the profile, where you'll provide general information about your organization. It's important to note that you make sure the email address you provide here matches the same email address you use to log into your grants portal account to prevent any back-end issues. The second form will be the application form, where you'll get into specifics about your project, including a dedicated form where you'll upload the various attachments required for a complete application. These attachments include the scope of work, statement of qualifications, and project map. Accessing the application forms often requires logging in twice. Next slide, please. Again, you can access the e-service guide on the CAL FIRE Grants website under the e-service grants information section. The user guide provides instructions on how to get your application submitted, from creating a portal account to the nuances of the budget settings within the application. This should be your go-to reference guide. Now I will pass it back to Kristen to conclude the presentation.
Hi there. Okay, so there have been a couple pilots that went before this program. Starting in 2022, CAL FIRE Force Health embarked on these 3 pilots to test this regional approach to grant giving. These were direct grants that were rolled out to coincide with regional task force meetings, and each pilot took a different, unique approach in how they selected projects. The first grant went to Humboldt County in support of the North Coast Resource Partnership. It was $10 million in forest health monies, applied predominantly to on-the-ground activities, and they're matching it with approximately $2 million with DOC regional forest and fire capacity funding that they're providing for technical assistance to prospective applicants, to prospective grantees, and to sub-awardees, and they're allowing for this technical assistance support all throughout the grant period. NCRP solicited proposals through an RFP. They've created a region-wide screening assessment that's focused on priority mapping areas for forest health treatments to mitigate wildfire hazard and promote resilient forests. And they use this assessment as a tool to help evaluate proposed projects. The status is that they awarded 8 projects, 3 to tribes, 4 to RCDs, and 1 to a nonprofit. They're in the process of finishing environmental compliance and moving into implementation, and some of those projects have already begun work on the ground. There's a QR code that should lead to their website defining their process. Another award in 2024 went to the Great Basin Institute to implement the Healthy El Dorado Landscape Partnership. This was a $7 million CAL FIRE Forest Health grant, matched with $2 million from SNC, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and about $1 million, and I think probably more since from the U.S. Forest Service for partnership and planning. This award went to a investment-ready landscape. SNC identified 4 finalists of these investment-ready landscapes through their pilot program based on a series of qualitative and quantitative assessments. They presented 4 of those finalists to CAL FIRE, who selected this project based on its best fit with the Forest Health Program objectives and our pilot grant guidelines. Execution of this project is rolling along very similar to a forest health grant, because it doesn't have like sub-grants underneath it. And they are in implementation. And then finally, a grant to the RCD of Greater San Diego County in support of SQUIRP. I love that It's the Southern California Wildfire Resilience Partnership, $5 million of CAL FIRE Forest Health funding, and $5 million of CAL FIRE Wildfire Prevention funding. The way that they selected projects is they have an MOU between 6 RFFC grantees. Each of those subgrantees got an equal amount of the $10 million, and each subgrantee coordinated through a unique work group focused on that sub-region, and their scope of the work group was to rank priority projects and review them against the grant guidelines and other relevant metrics for success based on their discretion. On the work group, they had representation, regional representation from a number of stakeholders, including CAL FIRE and Forest Service. And right now they are signing subgrant agreements and ensuring environmental compliance. So we've learned a lot from these regional grantees. What we have found is that these projects are really time intensive, and they took a lot longer than we thought, from prioritization to agreements. And that's for a variety of reasons. There's, as Erica mentioned, it's a complexity of the environmental compliance process is taking a while. Multi-party coordination across agencies, community partners, and landowners takes time. Contracting and subgrant execution also takes time. Second bullet, our grantees found that it would be difficult to be the grantee for this program without the support of the RFFC or other similar technical assistance funding. This funding has been invaluable. One of our grantees used RFFC technical assistance funding to support applicants to develop their projects and proposals, and they continue to use RFFC technical assistance for many of the subgrants, and they are using technical assistance consultants for navigating the environmental compliance pathways. Third bullet, having a strong subgrantee agreement template is essential, especially for liability reasons, and making that liability clear. As Erica mentioned, the grantee will need to be the responsible agency for environmental compliance, which is unique to CAL FIRE grants. And then the regional grantee is the backbone of the grant, providing coordination and communication with partners, technical and administrative support in applications, budgets, mapping, shapefiles, and reporting, through compliance, defining the CEQA pathways, identifying the lead agencies, providing compliance timelines for all projects, and then finally troubleshooting, finding and implementing solutions, overseeing subgrantees at different levels of readiness. Some have more capacity than others. So those are some of the lessons that we have learned and our grantees from the pilot projects have learned. Okay, we are wrapping up, and sorry we've gone over, but we're still we still have plenty of time to answer some questions. Here's a look at our timeline associated with this fiscal year's solicitation. Concept proposals are due May 13th. Nope, sorry. Concept proposals are due by 3 p.m. on June 30th. Again, eligible concept proposals will be reviewed and scored based on the concept proposal scoring criteria, and applicants who submit the most competitive concept proposals will be invited to submit a full proposal. Applicants will be notified and the portal will open no later than August 7th for full proposals. And we anticipate full proposals being due by 3 p.m. on September 17th. And expect to award by the end of 2026. This entire timeline is subject to change. All right, here's another QR code to the grant guidelines. Here's the email where you can contact us. Please make sure to sign up for email updates. We have our own new MailChimp on this CAL FIRE grants subscription page. I can't stress enough the importance of reading and referring to our grant guidelines. Before you send an email to this email address or schedule a technical assistance consultation, read the guidelines. Use the guidelines as a resource as you prepare your application. Treat it as a technical tool to guide your proposal. Yeah, we thank you to the team who very well presented this new opportunity. We have now until 11:30 for your questions. It's still helpful for us if you type your questions into the chat. It helps us organize it, and then it will help us answer those questions and include them in an FAQ to post on our website. I'm inviting my team to come off mute to answer questions that they're best adept to answer, and I will look at the chat. Is there a preferred regional geographics? Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, while you were looking at the chat, there was a question in the Q&A regarding the timing of like when CEQA documents need to be submitted. And Erica, I saw that you answered that just in writing, but maybe you can just briefly speak to that so we make sure it's captured in the recording.
Sure. So for the larger group, the question is, can you discuss again when the CEQA compliance paperwork must be submitted to CAL FIRE? And then it says before any project is implemented, question mark, or how, and then how far in advance of implementation. So prior to any kind of ground disturbing work, CEQA compliance needs to be completed, and the regional grantee would need to review and provide environmental clearance, for those implementation activities that would involve ground disturbing activity, and then provide that information to CAL FIRE. The other caveat of that is that if a subaward has a great deal of planning involved in their sub-project, the CEQA needs to be completed within 1 year of the sub-grant award. So the short answer is prior to implementation or within 1 year of the sub-grant award. And as far as submitting stuff to CAL FIRE, earlier the better. There's nothing like a Friday email sending in stuff saying, hey, we're ready to implement on Monday, here's our stuff. While we're not doing a great level of review for these, CAL FIRE staff, like we still want that stuff ahead of time. So hopefully that answers the question.
You're muted,
And Kristen,
Kristen.
if you're, yeah.
Thank you. Is there a preferred regional geographic size? No, we don't. We have not identified a preferred size, geographic size. We expect that we would get in different geographic regions and geographic sizes. Is a match required? No, a match is not required, but if you look at the funding priorities, priority C is projects that leverage CAL FIRE funds with other state, federal, local, and or private / philanthropic investments to produce the greatest public benefit, including projects that align program funding across climate bond programs. So projects that leverage other funding will be given, will be scored better. Are all tribal lands considered disadvantaged communities? I might have
I can take that
Mike.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, the bond definitions of disadvantaged communities are completely different than other definitions than we've seen in other funding sources. So in the climate bond, the definition is purely based on income. So it's possible that tribal communities would meet that income threshold. But additionally to that, all Native American tribes are considered vulnerable populations. So that's like another one of our kind of target sources that we want to be sending funding toward, is benefiting vulnerable populations. So tribal communities would would count toward would qualify for that designation.
Great, thank you. And Erica, the next one is if a tribe is the lead agency and work is being completed inside the reservation boundary, would NEPA apply over CEQA?
Yes, I was gonna respond that in the chat, but we can talk about that. So for tribal trust land or any land that is federal, that has NEPA federal completed, there is a public resource code, PRC 4799.05 D1. I'll put that in the chat. But that is a public resource code that basically says that if NEPA has completed for let's see, it's like prescribed fire, reforestation, habitat restoration, thinning, or fuel reduction projects, or is related to activities that is undertaken in whole or on part of federal lands that NEPA has been completed, a CEQA statutory exemption can be filed on that NEPA document. So there is a nexus for utilizing NEPA documents on these types of projects.
Great. Can prescribed grazing be used for non-forest landscape resilience? Yes. So we didn't duplicate like the types of activities from forested landscape resilience under eligible activities. We didn't duplicate and bring them under non-forest landscape resilience, but that grazing can be used. Same types of activities or treatment type, activities can be applied to the non-forested landscape resilience. Can you confirm the smallest and maximum grant award under this funding? Yes, that is on page 2 of the grant guidelines. Minimum grant amount requested must be no less than 5 million. Maximum allowable is 20 million. Since match isn't required, does it need to be included on the budget forms or only in the narrative? So for the concept proposal, we're not requiring a budget form, but we're just asking that you outline your budget, and we would want to know what types of funding you expect to leverage if you were invited back for a concept proposal. And then, yes, we'd want to see on your budget for your application any type of match funding. The applicants use grant funds for third-party consultants, contractors for grant management and administrative services if awarded a grant. Shannon, do you want to answer that one? It's taking me a while to process.
The applicants use grant funds for third-party consultants, contractors for grant management and administrative services if awarded a grant. Yes, so applicants can use additional consultants and contractors to do administration. We understand that there's a lot of reporting required for these, so we would prefer it be built into your budget. When you do get to this stage where it's a full budget, it's actually preferred. We cannot, though, pay for any services that a contractor would provide prior to the agreements being signed. A grant agreement being signed.
Thank you. Do we still need to complete CEQA despite Governor Newsom's executive order?
So I'm not familiar with that executive order. When I looked it up, I think who wrote this? Monique, I think you might be referring to the executive order that was enacted last spring, and correct me if I'm wrong. And that was the executive order that created CNRA and Cal EPA secretarial suspension authorization. And so while there was a mechanism to suspend some environmental laws and regulations, that was a separate process that you had to do and apply for. And those applications have closed as of May 1st to utilize that secretarial suspension authorization. If that is not the answer to your question, please come off mute and maybe I can better answer what you're trying to get at.
There's another CEQA question in the Q&A, Erica, if you can take another one. So it's, if a project has basically an existing CEQA approval, like if the document is, you know, several years old or whatever, is that still okay? Is basically the question, or do they need to do a new CEQA document?
So a lot of CEQA documents don't expire, so it's got to be an active CEQA document, and it would have to cover the sub-grant funded treatment, and that would be part of the review. But yes, and that is like, I'm glad you asked that question because it's the real life example of what it is to be a responsible agency for this grant program. And so when I had mentioned earlier that the regional grantee or their public agency partner would assume lead agency when applicable, but then always responsible agency. And so as a responsible agency, part of that is reviewing and accepting and utilizing existing CEQA documentation.
Okay, I'm going to go to some of the questions in the Q&A. My group is likely a better fit as a subgrantee. Is there a teaming mechanism? We don't have a teaming mechanism. The Department of Conservation Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program identifies who their grantees are. So that could be a place to identify like who might be doing work. You could contact your local fire safe council or RCD, see who's doing work, maybe your local CAL FIRE unit. Yeah, anybody else has any ideas? If there's been other work upstream over the long term, is that eligible for match? It's not eligible for match. Would it be eligible for improved scoring? It's kind of, I think that it would be looking at how it fits in as a region, your project fits in as a regional priority, and how it complements other work that's being done in the area. But no, we don't have, if you look at the scoring criteria, we don't have anything necessarily that is specific to giving additional points for other projects, except that if it's a compelling, so I would say looking at the regional scope of work makes a compelling case that the partnership and project portfolio will operate at a landscape level to collectively achieve measurable landscape health. So kind of like how that project fits in as a collective with past projects. Can a regional entity already have sub-award grantee partners and projects in mind? Yes, you do not necessarily have to follow the RFP type process. As I mentioned, each of our previous went through different prioritization processes to get there, but you should follow what we have identified in funding priority A, that it is science-based methodology, that it was a data-driven analysis with practitioner expertise and community input to get to that list. We covered the concept of CEQA, old proposal. We covered the regional geographic. We already discussed that. So I think I've addressed all the Q&A. And I think if there's any other questions, if anybody wants to raise their hand with other live questions, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll give you back some time. Okay. Let's see, Jamie.
Yes, hi. Can existing federal funds be used as matching funds?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, projects that leverage CAL FIRE funds with other state, federal, local, and or private/philanthropic investments.
Great, thank you.
Any other hands? All right, well, we're available at this email. There is a booking link that we're trying to make work in the grant guidelines to set up a technical, what are we calling it? Step 0, technical assistance consultation. So you can click book an appointment in the grant guidelines to follow that booking link. If it doesn't work for you, you can email us, but try the booking link first and read the grant guidelines. And we look forward to talking to you about your proposed projects. Thank you so much. Thanks to the team here.